Hi everyone. So this week we are going to talk about transportation and congestion. So in particular, we are going to talk about two modes of transportation. The first one is automobiles. The second one we're going to talk about mass transit. Okay. So this lecture we are going to focus more on the transport costs and also the congestion causes related to these two modes of transportation. Now, important keywords and concepts for this lecture. Okay, the first one we are going to focus on we are going to discuss the internalization of the externalities brought upon by these two types of transport, okay, which is automobiles and also mass transit. Okay, how to internalize the externalities caused by these two modes of transportation. Then we also will keep on touching on the concept of utility, okay, and like I said, there's two types of transportation that we are going to discuss in this lecture, which is automobiles and also mass transit. And when we talk about automobiles, we are talking about cars for personal use only, does not concern commercial vehicles. Now, modes of transport are different ways. What's the definition? First of all, we need to establish the definition of modes of transport. What's that? So modes of transport are different ways of transportation to move people or goods, okay? Including the modes, including air, including water, and land transport. Okay, and the modes of transport are important to a city, as they can determine, okay, these things. The first one is the citizens' ease of mobility. Okay, how easy can they move from one point within the city to another? Maybe for work, maybe for play, maybe for other purposes. So ease of mobility within the city. Then the citizens' cost of commuting to work. Okay, cost of commuting. Of course, if the transportation, the mode of transportation has a high cost, that will affect in a higher cost of commuting for these workers, and that will be reflected in the net income that they receive from their job, which is a lower net income. And what will that cost? That will cause utility to be affected as well, right? We have discussed this before. Next, the mode of transport will also determine the level of the citizens' health and also wellness. Okay, health in the sense that reliance on automobiles, for instance, has been proven to contribute to obesity as opposed to other modes of transport. For instance, cycling, for instance, even mass transit. Because when people take mass transit, they have to walk. Okay, they have to walk, they have to take the escalator, for instance. They have to walk from their home to the station, from one point to another, and also to the final destination, maybe work, maybe to some places that they want to go. So from the station, they need to walk, or they need to take other forms of transport. Okay. So at the end of the day, the health is related to the mode of transportation, because like I said just now, I gave the example of obesity. Okay? Obesity can lead to many health problems, health issues. Wellness, because of the fact that the modes of transportation, if it affects health, at the same time, it will affect also wellness of the citizens. The kesejahteraan, satu kesihatan, the other one is kesejahteraan. So wellness means the well-being of the citizens will also be affected if their health is affected. The types and levels of externalities, of course, if in a city where automobiles are the main mode of transportation at the cost of other modes of transportation, what this means is the level of pollution may be high in the city, right? So that will cause externalities in the cities. And there are other forms of externalities as well related to each type of each mode of transport. For instance, for cars, we have the negative externalities in terms of emissions and pollutions from the exhaust pipes. Exhaust pipes. Also for externalities brought upon by other modes, such as the mass transit just now. What kind of externalities brought upon by that? Externalities, I can think of maybe this one. recall our experience now with the pandemic, whereby a pandemic or any epidemic can easily be transferred from one person to another within a mass transit compared to private vehicles. So that can be externalities as well, right? So each type of transport will have its own externalities, whether positive or negative. Okay, must remember externalities are not just negative but also positive externalities as well, whereby the people who's not doing the activity receives the benefit or suffers the cost from the activity done by another person. Size and density of the city will also be affected. Of course, if we talk about automobiles, okay, what that means is the promotion of automobiles can lead to sprawl because they lead to more road networks to be built that will cause ease of movement from the workers to their place of residence, and that will cause sprawl, which is movement of development away from the city center. Okay, size, density, less dense lah. If there's sprawl, that means that most probably the city will be less dense. Kurang orang di dalam bandar atau dalam pusat bandar. The level of infrastructure expenditure, of course, okay, depending on the mode of transport, okay, each mode of transport will require, okay, its own types or its own expenditure on infrastructure. For instance, if we talk about mass transit, for instance, infrastructure such as rails, must be built, stations for the mass transit must be built. What else? Stations, rails, and the stations, okay, stations are built not only on the surface land, but also in many countries now. The rails are built in tunnels, in underground. Underground. So what does that mean? Okay, that will mean that that will incur costs of land acquisition on surface land, and also on the underground area also may involve perhaps not land acquisition but payments to the surface land owners. Okay. For roads, for automobiles, for instance, automobiles require roads. Okay, automobiles require roads. What else? Parking lots. They require junctions. They require traffic signals. All these things are all requiring some level of infrastructure expenditure. Now, the next one, businesses transaction costs for goods. Of course, the type of transport available in the city will determine, okay, the transaction cost for the business, for the businesses in terms of if there are a good road network, for instance, that will mean for their commercial vehicles, for the containers, for the large trucks, for them it will be easy for them to transport their goods to another place. So maybe that will lower the cost of transportation. Even more so if there's a rail service. Rail service means that they can transfer the goods in bulk. Okay, so that means lower transaction cost for them. Okay, so it depends on the mode of transportation. And land transport is particularly important to cities, whereby we depend on road and rail or railways. Now, in most countries, the post-World War II prosperity brought with it two other changes. So after the World War II, okay, we see there's a boom in the economy. So with it came prosperity. Okay, when there's prosperity, that means there are increased demands for, there were more opportunities for jobs, for instance, higher income. So that brought upon a great wave of suburbanization. When people are looking for places to stay, they move from the city area to the outer city area, to the outside the city, because they may find cleaner air, less congestion, things like that, more spaces for the children, things like that, better schools maybe in suburbs. Yeah, so a great wave of suburbanization. And also another trend that was found after the World War II was a significant increase in automobile ownership. due to, like I said just now, due to increased prosperity, increased household income, disposable income that allowed the households to purchase automobiles. If before, for them, buying cars was outside their reach because of low income, because of no stable job. But after World War II, the prosperity allowed them this opportunity to buy their own cars. So we had two trends. One, suburbanization. Number two is increase in automobile ownership. Now, these two situations, these two trends, the suburbanization and also increase in automobile ownership, these two can be described as complementary. They fit into each other. Okay? Because when people live outside the city, which leads to suburbanization, when businesses move from the CBD to the suburbs, what this happens is they require car ownership. So automobile ownership will increase. Okay? Because of course, most probably the public transport couldn't catch up with the suburbanization of the cities, the suburbanization rate. So that's why people rely more on automobiles rather than public transport or mass transit. Okay? On the other hand, mass transit or public transportation, which includes buses, subways, light rail and commuter rail, did not enjoy a market growth after 2002. After World War II. Not like automobiles. So they, when automobile consumption or automobile ownership increased, okay, the mass transit decreased. So that's a trend. That's a general trend. Okay, and we can see the trend now. Even I will show you in a few slides down what happens to the trend in automobile ownership in the world and also in Malaysia. I will show you. Now, so what happened? Why is this so? Sorry. What's the reason and what's the implication of this trend, whereby mass transit did not enjoy a market growth? In some countries, ridership is still small. Ridership means the number of users of the mass transit. So we call these users riders. So the rate of people using the mass transit is the ridership. Okay, so when ridership is small, that means that the investment into the infrastructure for the mass transit will not receive the return that the provider intended. So this will mean that the provider will experience losses because they couldn't get the optimum level of ridership. Now, the cost of commuting via automobile is still lower than public transport in some countries because of the fact that public transport did not enjoy economies of scale because less people are using. Okay, less people using the mass transit compared to automobiles. Cost commuting lower for cars. Now we go to the first one, which is automobiles. Now overview, the automobile industry has experienced a decline. So we said after World War II, there was an increase in automobile consumption or ownership. But we can see lately, in recent years, since 2017, we can see a decline in the private car sales in the world. This is global private car sales, okay, by the International Organization of Motor Vehicle Manufacturers. Okay, generally there's been an increase, okay, worldwide in car sales. Now, the downward trend came as a result of various factors, including slowing global economy, rising traffic congestion, ride-sharing options. So this is actually a contributor, a significant contributor to the to the fall of car ownership, whereby we now have Grab, we have Uber, these ride-sharing facilities or ride-sharing apps allowing people not to purchase their own cars, but use the apps, use Uber, use like I said just now, Grab. In Malaysia we have Grab, yes, so Grab, Uber. Because of this ride-sharing options, enhanced public transportation systems. In some countries they have pumped more investment into the public transport systems. For instance, in Malaysia we now have the MRT2 almost finished. There's only one segment or two segments left before the the whole of MRT2 is completed, the whole line. Same with other countries as well. Jakarta, highly congested country. They also have been putting in money in their public transport infrastructure. And the advent of a pandemic in key consumer countries, of course, what happened now with the COVID-19, okay, in some major consumer countries like the USA, Korea, for instance, these countries are experiencing a decline in their car sales, therefore contributing to the overall decline in the car sales globally in the world. Now, in Malaysia, what about the trend of private car ownership in Malaysia? Although there is a general trend globally of declining car sales or registration since 2017-18, Malaysian car sales and registration has generally increased over the years. Yes, we experienced a decline, a decrease in our GDP growth. Here we can see that 2017, 18, 19, estimated 2008-19, we experienced 3 years of decline in our GDP growth, but still you can see that our number of car sales registration keep on increasing. Why is that? An answer could be provided here by the fact that we now have more people doing Grab cars, so they need to buy their own cars. That's why, despite the fact that we have a fall in our GDP growth, but there's an increase in private car consumption, because people may be laid off from their job, businesses may close, so the alternative is Grab, Uber. And at the same time, in terms when we compare our country Malaysia with other ASEAN countries, Malaysia's car ownership is one of the highest in the C region, Southeast Asia region, behind Brunei. So Brunei is the leader in ASEAN countries. We come second in the Southeast Asia region. Now, the implication of this trend of having more private cars on the road is externalities. So, in what terms? What kind of externalities are we talking about? There are 3 main externalities generated by automobiles. The first one is congestion. The second one is air pollution. The third one is vehicle collisions. And to increase the efficiency, we have learned this before. So to be socially efficient, the MC must be equal to the MB. The marginal consumption, marginal cost must be equal to the marginal benefits. At the intersection of MC and MD, we will find the optimum level of goods or services to be provided, and we can find the optimum level of price to be charged. Now, so the externalities must be internalized. If there's an overconsumption of a good that contributes to higher social costs, then we must reflect that in the price. Increase the price by what? By introducing taxes with the main intention to internalize the social cost just now. Internalize meaning we charge higher price to be reflected in the private cost. Now, congestion, what's that? What's the definition? So congestion is a condition on transport that is characterized by slower speeds, longer trip times, and increased vehicular queuing. So these are all the symptoms of congestion, slower speeds in the city center, for instance. Where you see the speed limit being 25, being 30, but then due to the fact that there are so many cars, there's congestion, you now have to slow down to 10 kilometers per hour, for instance, slower speeds in the city. Longer trip times because of the fact that you have to drive slower, and also queuing. You have to queue to get to a place, for instance, parking and things like that, finding parkings, or going to a certain address. You have to wait your turn to get to that particular road. Now, congestion can occur for any mode of transportation, but is particularly apparent on automobile. Congestion is normally associated with the automobile. Now, World Bank's 12th Malaysia Economic Monitor said, so this is the whole name of the report, the 12th Malaysia Economic Monitor by the World Bank. says that people in Greater KL spend more than 250 million hours per year being stuck in traffic congestion, and translating that into ringgit, okay, that's about 12.7 billion to 24.7 billion, double lah. So this is just an estimation because it's the estimation is made in terms of our GDP, which is 1.1 to 2.2. So this double, 2.2 is double 1.1, which times our GDP can be translated into these monetary terms. That's quite a lot, isn't it? 12.7 billion to 24.7 billion due to economic losses, the waiting time just now, people not being able to be productive in their cars, for instance. So that's the situation in Malaysia, whereby the congestion cost about 1.1 to 2.2% loss to our GDP. The cost is 1.1 to 2.2%. What about other countries? We can see here, okay, in the US itself, estimation, LA is very famous for its traffic congestion. Okay, so time loss you have for each city. London in the US for LA, UK for London, and Germany, Munich. Okay, so you have the time lost in terms of hours. Okay, congestion parking. Okay, and then equal to how many days, and then this the final figure. Okay, so time loss in congestion. From that, you can translate that into $19.2 billion, not ringgit, okay, dollars. $12.2 billion, 5.6, so quite substantial. Okay, the cost of congestion in terms of monetary terms. Now, sorry. Share. Wait, yeah. Now, where were we just now? Stop. Oh, sorry about that. I want to pause. Stop video. I cannot. Okay, anyway, we were here just now, right? Okay, wait, let me just, okay, pause. Okay, back to our sharing. Okay, now congestion externalities. The first one is congestion. Okay, congestion externalities, which include, okay, increased commuting time and also fuel consumption. So these are the externalities. Okay, and how to internalize the congestion externalities? We can internalize using congestion tax, or in a more general term, a generic term, we call it road pricing. Kita price road pricing through congestion tax. Okay, so look at the diagram here that can conceptualize, that can show you in the concept of congestion tax. Now, we have the x-axis, the number of vehicles, the y-axis, the trip cost, and the demand curve. Okay, of course, we know that demand curve is downward sloping. Marginal demand is the willingness to pay, and the willingness to pay is the same as the marginal benefit, the extra benefit that we obtain from the consumption of an additional good. So demand punya curve is the same as marginal benefit curve. Okay, whereby we expect the marginal benefit derived from the unit to decline as we consume more units. That's why it's downward sloping. Now, this is the private trip cost, private cost, but since we are talking about congestion, okay, road trip, so we are talking about the trip cost. Okay, so the private cost or private trip cost equals the average cost or average trip cost. Okay, this is the what you call the curve. The curve for cost. Cost is upward sloping. As more vehicles, the cost will be higher. So average cost will be higher, logically. Now, see the point. At the point of interaction between the private cost, the private trip cost, which is the average trip cost, with the demand or marginal benefit, this is the equilibrium point. Equilibrium point of consumption, whereby at this equilibrium point, this is the number of vehicles on the road, and this is the cost, the trip cost paid by the private individuals, the private people just now, the individuals just now. So private means for individuals, but look at the social trip cost. The cost, the trip cost borne by the society, the marginal trip cost, the MC. So we learned before that to be efficient, MB must equal MC, kan? So this is the optimum level, actually, the desirable level of consumption of the number of trips, that the society needs, actually, the optimum level. So at O, which is the interaction between the marginal cost and the marginal benefit curve, okay, the optimum point here, this is actually the cost that we should charge on the trip. And this is actually should be the number of vehicles on the road, lower than the the equilibrium just now, right? The private trip just now, right? Because of the fact that the MC equals MB at a higher cost level and at lower consumption, lower vehicle level. Now, what happens now? There is inefficiency there, because the cost charge is lower than what it should be, and the number of vehicles on the road are higher than what it should be. There is an inefficiency there. The optimum level is not reached because of the fact that there's equilibrium level there, borne by each individuals. Now, so this is the congestion tax to be levied, to be charged by the authorities. We put a congestion tax, which is this one, the tax. The tax is at the level of the number of vehicles on the road. We plot that or we trace that to the marginal cost curve. So this is the level of tax that should be charged. The actual cost. The actual cost. So what's the difference between this and this level? That is the tax level. Tax level to be charged. Now, after charging the congestion tax, okay, we get a net gain from congestion tax. So that's the first argument for congestion tax, whereby we say that congestion tax will increase the private cost. And instead of paying CE, now they have to pay CT, which is CE plus the tax, a higher cost to be borne by individuals using the road to reflect the social costs that they cost. Now, the equilibrium number of vehicles will be reduced. Okay, equilibrium now because of the higher level of cost to be borne. And now the private individuals will reduce their consumption because they cannot afford to pay the higher cost, which includes the tax just now. Okay, so when the number of vehicles are reduced, okay, from the equilibrium level to be introduced, they will move to the left. Nearer to the optimum level of vehicles on the road. So that's the main idea of, or the main benefit, the number one benefit of charging congestion tax. And due to that, we can also say that higher efficiency will be achieved as road users face the full social cost of travel. Due to this argument, it's closer to the interaction between marginal cost and marginal benefit point, which is the optimum level, the O. Okay. Now, again, okay, what will be the effect on cities, on urban areas of the imposition of congestion tax? What will be the effect on a city? Now, imagine there's a city. So this is the city's initial utility. Okay, this is one city. What happens if another city imposes congestion tax? So this diagram will show you, okay, what happens to the utility, what happens to the size of the city. Size of the city is represented by the number of workers in the city. Now, this is the original situation. There's a city. The initial utility of the city is this, i.e. At the point of i.e. you have utility at $70. You have the workers at 4 million workers. Okay, initial utility. Now, one city suddenly introduced congestion tax. Okay, congestion tax, whereby the utility in the congestion tax city with the population of 4 million though, if we map against the workers in the original city, 4 million, okay, this is the tax, okay, this is the tax, and this will be the utility enjoyed by the workers in that city, the city that introduced the congestion tax, which is the utility will increase. Why will the utility increase now? Remember, when we said just now, consumption will decrease. Once you impose congestion tax, what does that mean? That will mean less vehicles on the road. Less vehicles on the road means the vehicles on the road can increase their speeds. Increase their speeds means that there will be less waiting time, less fuel consumption. Of course, utility will increase due to that, due to the congestion tax, the benefits introduced by the congestion tax just now. Now, so we say that utility caused by the congestion tax will increase due to that reason. But these figures we just put just for illustration purposes. Okay, now next. So what happens then in the new city because of the fact that they have higher utility in that city that introduced the congestion tax? The number of workers will increase. The movement is to the right. On the marginal utility curve. Now, at this level, for instance, this level, this is the number of the workers in the new city. They increase more workers going to the city that introduced the congestion tax. Okay, at this level, of workers moving to the new city. It will give a new point, a new utility point. Since more workers move to the new cities, what happens to a new city? Crowding begins to happen, kan? Crowding begins to happen. There will be less public goods to be that must be shared among the larger number of population. So what happens then? Instead of enjoying $84 as utility, the utility will decrease in the city that introduced the congestion tax. Okay, I hope you are with me with the explanation. Anyway, what happens to this? We are interested to know what happens to the original city. Okay. Now, what happens is the number of workers in that city will contract. It will shrink. The city size will shrink. Because of the fact that just now we said that more that people move to the new cities due to the higher utility enjoyed. Okay, so in the original city there will be a shrinkage in terms of size as people leave the city. But when people leave the city, the new point, the new utility is this one. The new utility same as the city that introduced the congestion tax, which is 77. Okay, if we compare again the original utility, when there are less people at the original city, say we have lost 600,000 people. What happens is, okay, the lesser number of people means there's less crowding in the city, less congestion. Okay, less people to share the public goods, better quality of life in the original city. So what does that mean? That means that instead of enjoying $70 as their utility, due to the fact that there's less people in the city, now the utility has increased. Okay, increased to maybe $77. So a city that implements a congestion tax will grow. This one, the city just now, the second city will grow at the expense of other cities in the region. The city that doesn't have any actions to address the congestion in their city will lose the population. As the population in the city will move to a city that introduced the congestion tax just now because of the better living there. Now, better quality of living there. Now, utility will, end result is utility will increase in both cities. So argument number 2 for congestion tax and utility just now. If the original city didn't introduce any congestion tax, okay, nobody will come to the city, right? So nobody will come to the city, no chance to grow. That's why it will stay at the old level of utility. Okay, so it's a win-win situation for both. Next, air pollution. So another externality is pollution. 2 environmental externalities, which is air pollution and greenhouse gases. A pollution tax would internalize the externalities, whereby people will be encouraged to buy cleaner cars, okay, and it will encourage people to drive fewer miles, okay. And there are 4 ways to impose a pollution tax, which is install monitoring device in vehicle to measure emissions, impose a one-time pollution tax on new cars, impose petrol tax, and subsidize the mass transit to internalize the air pollution. Now, vehicle accidents, the third type of externalities just now caused by automobiles. These include collisions with other vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians, and can cause congestion due to blocked traffic. You can experience this every day in the road, on our Malaysian roads, especially as daily occurrence on some famous highways in near to us, the federal highway. If there's a slight accident, it will cause traffic jam or congestion, miles and miles of traffic congestion. People will stop or people will slow down, and not just maybe not to look or not to walk, but they are being careful because there's there's cars, there's a blockage in front, okay, and cause congestion. Now, effects of the accidents, we have property damage, car damage, property damage, injury, and death. And vehicle accidents depend on the miles driven. Therefore, externalities from vehicle accidents are internalized through vehicle safety policies and pay to drive policies. Now, vehicle safety policies such as the airbags, such as what else? Internalized vehicle safety policies. Yeah, airbags is a good example. Yeah, and pay to drive policies, which is when cost of driving is higher, then people will think twice to take to use the road. That's why less vehicles on the road and will cause to less vehicle accidents. So what happens to land use patterns? How does automobile affect land use patterns? The motor vehicle has been described as it has a voracious appetite for land, like we said just now. Okay, car ownership or car consumption, okay, will lead to an increased car consumption or car ownership will lead to increased road, for instance, road networks for them. Two, car parks, parking facilities. Then what else? The traffic signages, petrol stations, and things like that. So we can describe the motor vehicle as having a voracious appetite for land, just to accommodate them. Now, effects on cities, and also voracious appetite at the expense of other urban users, not just road users, but also other urban users. For instance, the roads that have to be built to accommodate cars may be used for agriculture, for instance, or other users, for instance. Okay. Now, effects on city shape and density, it facilitates suburbanization, so it facilitates the moving away of the population from the city center, and ultimately urban sprawl, and it dominates land use due to the needs for streets and roads, parking. So these are the things that I mentioned just now, the voracious appetite. So streets and roads, parking lots, service stations, driveways, signals and traffic signs, automobile-oriented businesses, the workshops, car workshops, car dealerships, all these are needed to serve the increased patterns or increased consumption in cars at the cost of other forms of transportation, cyclists and other users such as pedestrians. Now we go to the second part, which is mass transit. Okay, mass transit is also another name for public transportation, public transport lah. Now in Malaysia, we have currently 11 fully operational mass transit providers, which include MRT, LRT, and high-speed rail. Whatever we have that in Malaysia, the commuters. Now, low ridership. That's a problem with our mass transit in Malaysia, but it's not only our country's problem. This is an issue faced by many countries. The issue of low ridership, which was reflected in 2015 at only 20%. 20% is very low. Average about 1 million riders per month in 2019, and the causes of low ridership: one, cheap petrol price, parking facilities, and lack of public transport connectivity. This is something, this is a concept, last mile connections. So from the mass transit stations, from the LRT station, MRT station, okay, how do you go to your final destination, the last mile connections? Do you have a feeder bus, for instance, for that area? Do you have other options, for instance? Now the problem has been partly solved by Grab and Uber. We don't have Uber anymore in Malaysia. By Grab, for instance. So from station university, in we have the station university, right? So from station university, how do you get to That's the last mile connections. So now you have a choice. You can use the feeder bus that goes into You can use Grab to go into You can also, some people walk, that's the last mile connectivity lah. And it's not that far. I think 1 kilometer, 1.5 is walkable because of the fact that there are there are traffic lights for pedestrians that facilitate. There are also walkways for pedestrians. But what about places where there are no dedicated walkways or pedestrian ways from the station to the places that they want to go to their final destinations? So those are the reasons that can deter people from using mass transit. Now, so ridership, ridership we can see steadily increasing from 98 to 2005, overall increase, but rate of growth slowed from 2000 onwards. Now, the cost of travel. When you take the mass transit, what would be the cost of travel for individuals? So this is the formula that shows the trip cost for individuals. So the formula is simple enough. Okay, the formula is M plus TA times DA plus TV times DV. Now, M is the monetary cost, is the tambang, is the fee, is the how much you pay for that particular mass transit for the service. Maybe your ticket lah, your ticket you have to pay for that to use the mass transit. So the monetary cost. 1, 2, access time. What is that? Is the time of waiting, to get into the mass transit, into your coach, for instance, the mass transit coach, for instance. How long do you have to wait? That is the access time. So what's the frequency of the mass transit, of the trains, for instance? How long do you have to wait will depend on the frequency of the trips, of the trains, and also what else? The number of providers, the number of options that you have. So what's the waiting time like? Times what? Times the marginal, the DA just now stands for marginal disutility of access time. It's actually, marginal disutility is actually the opportunity cost. Now go back to the definition of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the next best alternative forgone. So what can you do with your time when you are waiting for your train just now? So what's the alternative to that, to the waiting time? You could have, for myself, I could have lecture. I could do a lecture. So my rate is how much per hour? Or I could work at that time, the waiting time. So I wasted how much per hour? Translate that into monetary cost lah. So what's the opportunity cost? The access times the opportunity cost loss lah. And the next best alternative forgone. Maknanya you wasted time. If you could do something else, if you could do an alternative activity besides waiting, okay, convert that into figure, then times the access time. Say you wait 1 hour. So 1 hour I can work. So what's my rate? 8 hours, $8 per hour. So 1 times 8 is, ataupun access time in minutes, so 60, no lah, per hour just now. So per hour dengan per hour, so that's 8 lah. Say you pay for your ticket is $3, RM3. So your TA times DA is 1 hour times the rate is 8 hours, RM8 sejam, 8 hours per hour. So that's RM8 already. So 3 plus 8, 11. So M plus TA plus, times DA is already RM11. What about TV times DV? So TV is in vehicle time, the time that you take to get from point A to point B in the mass transit punya train, in the mass transit punya vehicle lah. Okay. And what times what's the marginal disutility of in-vehicle time, the opportunity cost, the time spent times the rate lah. Like I said just now, if I spend 20 minutes and I could have done something else, which I translate, for instance, I can work and my work pays me 8 ringgit per hour. If I spend 20 minutes, 20 over 60 is 1 over 3 kan, 20 minutes. So 1/3 times 8 is how much? 8 bagi 3 is about $2 something, $2. So just now 3 plus 8 plus 3, katakan 3.33 itu just now. So 3 plus 8 plus 3, so you get what? 6 plus 8, 14. So that is the trip cost. Instead of just considering the money you pay to the ticket, for the ticket, you also have to pay for the excess time and also in-vehicle time. So all together, we can say that, okay, it cost me 11 ringgit for my trip. Okay. Efficient volume of ridership. Now, general cost includes capital cost, operating cost, and rider cost. Okay. Capital cost is cost of laying the rails and buying the vehicles, a very big expenditure at the beginning. Okay. When you have to spend on the capital itself, capital cost, rails and the vehicles, the trains just now. Operating cost, labor, fuel, maintenance. This is for the operations, operations of the mass transit just now. Okay, now bear in mind, vehicles just now is not just for your for the trains that you ride on, but also for, in some cases, for trains they need repair trains to be able to come, or repair coaches to be able to come to any stranded coach or trains. So you have to pay for that as well, emergency coaches or emergency vehicles. Then rider costs, this utility of travel or opportunity cost of travel time. So just now the one trip cost, the utility, the marginal disutility, which is the opportunity cost. Now the cost curve, this is interesting. Now back in my just now I said cost curve is upward sloping, right? But cost curve for transit is negatively sloped. So it's special for mass transit, okay, whereby the cost curve for transit is negatively sloped. It slopes downwards, dia macam demand curve. Due to what? Due to Mohring economies. So this is a concept that causes the cost curve for transit to be negatively sloped. Okay, what is Mohring economies? So basic principle is more riders will lead to more frequent trips, reducing excess time costs. Excess time costs. Okay, I go back to 2 slides down. This one this one can excess time. So this portion may be reduced. Okay, so once you reduce this, the cost will go down. Now, more riders again lead to more frequent trips, reducing excess time costs, which is familiar to you. What is the concept that we have learned so far? That I have mentioned many times before. Economies of scale, right? So Mohring economies, maknanya dia dah experience economies of scale. Now, argument number 1 for transit subsidy, this one, Mohring economies, whereby increase in ridership will cause costs, average and marginal, to decrease. So that is a strong argument, okay, to support transit subsidy, because when you give subsidy for your mass transit, more people will be attracted to use the mass transit. More riders lead to more frequent trips, reducing excess time costs. So it fits into the situation. Now, so transit subsidy, how does it work? Okay, now transit subsidy, demand is downward sloping. Demand or marginal benefit, same. It's the same concept as the automobiles just now. Demand is downward sloping. The only difference is for transit, the cost curve is downward sloping as well due to Mohring economies. Okay, so for the both average cost and marginal cost slopes for transit are negatively sloped. Why? I answered just now is because of Mohring economies. Okay, negatively sloped, same direction with the demand curve. Now, the marginal cost, this one, is lower than the average cost curve because the average cost includes capital cost element. Like I said, there's three types of three types of cost. One is capital, operating, rider cost. Okay, so for marginal, it disregards the capital cost. It excludes the capital cost. That's why the marginal cost curve is lower than the average cost curve. Now, second point. Third point is equilibrium ridership is at point E, where with RE, with the ridership being RE and the number of riders and the trip cost at CE. So this is the equilibrium level. What is equilibrium? Is when equilibrium. Yeah, equilibrium is private cost tadi sama dengan marginal benefit. Okay, equilibrium, actual equilibrium. Okay, so at this E point, the intersection between average cost and marginal benefit curve, okay, you have this number of rider R, and you have this cost being charged C, okay, or being incurred. The cost, the trip cost is C, CE, CE rider RE. Socially efficient ridership. When we talk about socially efficient, we are talking about optimum level. So how do you get the optimum level? It must be intersection or intersection between the MC and the MB. So MC is this curve, the lower one, the lower from the average cost curve. MC interacts with MB at this point O, point O. So at point O, the ridership number of riders is at RO, the socially desirable. Tadi tu actual kan RE. So the desirable, socially desirable number of riders is actually higher at RO with the cost after the increased number of riders. When the Mohring economy kicks in and when it takes place, you have the cost going down because we enjoy economies kan, economies. Okay. Now, to reach this optimum level of ridership, socially at optimum level, to attract people to ride more, what do? This one, the transit operators has to cut the fare to CO. From CE just now, this is the amount that the provider, the mass transit provider has to cut. They must subsidize, leading to a deficit of CECO. This one at this level of deficit, CECO, because you have to reduce the cost from CE to CO to get this optimum level of ridership. Who bears the deficit? The deficit is borne by subsidy. Who pays the subsidy? The government provides the subsidy. Okay, transit subsidy. Now, transit subsidy versus automobile externalities. Now, automobile use generates externalities, congestion, air pollution, vehicle collision. We know this. I have covered this above. As a result, drivers pay less than full social cost of the travel, which is underpriced. A transit subsidy decreases the relative cost of transit and increases transit ridership, Mohring economies. A transit subsidy also increases the relative cost of driving, thus reducing the equilibrium number of drivers. When people compare the cost of driving and the cost of taking the transit, this is what is meant by relative. Relative means you compare two things, kan? So when you compare the cost of driving and the cost of taking the transit, the mass transit, okay, you will see that the cost of taking the mass transit is lower than driving. Okay, so what happens? People will be more inclined to take the mass transit when they compare the two costs. They say, oh, I can save my money by taking the mass transit rather than by taking my car. What will happen then? The equilibrium number of drivers will be reduced. Equilibrium to actual. Equilibrium number of drivers will be reduced. So this is the second argument for transit subsidy, whereby transit subsidy can reduce automobile externalities. Good. Now, the role of density. The role of density in terms of mass transit. Is it important? Is it not important? Okay, so this slide will discuss. Population density enables mass transit to enjoy economies of scale and Mohring economies. So, density is important. Density is good for ridership. Okay, for most people, okay, they only allocate or they only want to walk a maximum of 10 minutes to their transit stop. So for instance, from to Station University, for most people, they say if I can walk there within 10 minutes, then it's okay for me. But if it's more, I'm not willing to walk. It's too far. Or translated into distance, okay, 10 minutes, maybe 800 meters lah. So people may take longer or shorter to walk kan. But in terms of distance, 800 meters. So I would say from the gate or even from the boundary of to the Station University is within this particular distance. But to get from the station to your faculty could be longer lah kan. But anyway, that's just an example. Okay, so, but it says here for most people, maximum walking time that they can take is 10 minutes or 800 meters. So what does that mean? That means that you need density, and also the less frequent the transit, the higher minimum density required. You need more density for a less frequent transit. Therefore, higher density will promote a more frequent transit. Lagi cepat train tu, lagi banyak train dalam per hour. Okay. So this is translated, density just now is translated in terms of people per hectare of urban or residential land. Okay, so you will find density in your planning punya planning punya cost. For those people not from real estate background, density is a concept under town planning, whereby it is translated, okay, into people per hectare of urban or residential land. Now, what about land use patterns? In a growing economy, rail transit contributes to the clustering of activities near downtown stations. Agglomeration, cluster. Okay? The clustering is not significant outside the CBD. Investments in rail transit must be used together with land use instruments such as zoning and property taxations. Investment result. That's why you cannot leave rail transit directly to the market to determine. If you leave without government intervention, what happens is you cannot control. You without subsidy, without subsidy for the mass transit, without congestion tax, without road pricing, people will prefer to drive because of so many benefits. Maybe low now, even more so with low cost of petrol, kan? So people prefer to drive, and also without government intervention in terms of zoning, in terms of planning, people will prefer to live outside the city area. So density is not there. When there is a sprawl, when there is a suburbanization, when there is sprawl, okay, that will mean less density in the city. Less density will translate into less ridership. Less ridership will be negative. Will have negative impact or negative effects on the mass transit. Okay, so if zoning and taxation is used to create high density development, rail transit can be a means to deliver a large number of workers to the CBD. That is why now we have the TOD concept, transport-oriented development, whereby the idea is for developments to occur or to be near stations. Transit-oriented or transport-oriented developments. Transit ke transport? Transit-oriented, TOD, find that out. TOD, whereby they say now developers are selling their properties in Malaysia, in KL for instance, they say it's only 5 minutes walk from the nearest MRT station. Only 10 minutes walk from the nearest MRT station, LRT station, or LRT, MRT monorail is available in the area. So those are the things that could attract people, and those this is actually TOD, transport-oriented developments. So that's all for today. What you can do after this is you can Google some Google. What can you Google? If you are not familiar for non-real estate students. You can Google concepts such as density, because we don't cover that in this class. Density and also economies of scale. Maybe you haven't learned, you haven't taken any basic economics or principles of economy before this. But for real estate students, we know this already. So with that, thank you for your time. Okay, happy studying. Bye bye.